so hello and welcome. Today's event is an open preview of the annual Aspen Ethical Leadership Program, which will take place in Aspen, Colorado, September 10th through 13th. And the intent of these Meet the Keynote conversations is to demonstrate the informal opportunities that we create at the program to meet and chat with keynote speakers and panelists to learn more about them as people, in addition to what they have to teach us as health system leaders. This year's program's theme is Leading Towards Justice, with each program day exploring different aspects of how justice can inform healthcare decision-making around both existing and emerging ethical challenges, including those raised by the new promises and risks of artificial intelligence in healthcare. So today I'd like to extend a warm welcome to our program alumni. I saw some of you on the list and accepted applicants. I also encourage those of you who are hearing about the Aspen program for the first time to check out the website and fill out the short application form to join the program. There's no cost to apply and no obligation to attend when accepted. It's really unlike anything else. I'm so sincere when I say this, anything else in the healthcare space. We cap attendance around 50 participants, and it's a small, intimate retreat, highly interactive, lots of time for hiking, networking, exploring the town. So it's a really great space to work through ethical challenges in leadership. Today's conversation will be moderated by Patrick O'Rourke. Mr. O'Rourke is the Executive Vice Chancellor and the Chief Operating Officer of the Boulder campus at CU. He is also an adjunct faculty member of the University of Colorado School of Law and the University of Colorado School of Public Health. He will be speaking today with Dean Dayna Bowen Matthew, who is the keynote for day 2 of the Aspen program. Dean Matthew is a leader in public health and civil rights law who focuses on disparities in health, healthcare, and the social determinants of health. She joined George Washington University Law School in 2020, and she's the founder and inaugural faculty director of GW's New Equity Institute, an interdisciplinary research hub dedicated to addressing racial, ethnic, and socioeconomic injustice. Dean Matthew is also the author of 2 best-selling books, Just Medicine, A Cure for Racial Inequality in American Healthcare, and the recently released Just Health, Treating Structural Racism to Heal America. So with that, I'll turn the program over to Patrick to start today's conversation. Welcome to you both.
Thank you. And thank you to everyone who's joining us. When I was looking through the list of participants, it's nice to see some friends from previous sessions of the Aspen Ethical Leadership Program, and I hope to see you again soon. But today I'm awfully excited to give you a chance to spend some time with my friend and really a thought leader who we can learn a lot from, Dayna Bowen Matthew, who is the Dean of the George Washington School of Law. So Dayna, thank you for joining us.
Oh, Pat, I'm so excited to be here. Thank you for having me.
Well, there's nobody who would be able to come to Aspen and talk to us about leading towards justice and the intersection between race and healthcare and how we better serve communities than you. But before we delve into those topics a little bit, can you just give the group a little sense of yourself and the journey that led you to where you are now?
Certainly. It's funny that you asked me today. I'm sitting in a conference room in a fancy law firm in New York City. I grew up in New York, and the past 3 days I've been here on GW Law business, which means I've been talking to very fancy people about very high ideas. Since I grew up here, I'm aware of what a completely different world I'm occupying as I come back to fundraise among my alumni as dean, as compared to how I grew up here for 18 years as a kid. I'm walking the same streets, but I'm seeing different sights. I'm eating in different places. I'm riding in different vehicles. I am staying overnight in different places, some I never knew existed. And that's what compels me to talk about justice. and what compels me to talk about the differences I'm experiencing as they relate to health. I rode the subway all the time when I was a kid. I stayed in the South Bronx, which I dare say I won't see while I'm here this time. I ate hot dogs from street vendors, which is nothing like what I've been able to enjoy this time around. My workspaces and hours were completely different. It's even fair to say that the air I breathed was different than the air I'm breathing on this trip, since I lived at the cross section of 4 interstate highways in the South Bronx, about 1.5 miles from a waste transfer station. So all of those things shaped me as an individual. And I've just been reflecting on the 2 different worlds that are occupied by people here in New York City. And I'm experiencing it firsthand. It's kind of a wild way to answer your question, but that's what's on my mind about who I am and how I got here.
Well, let me follow up on that a little bit, which is that in the beginning of Just Health, you describe a little bit of your family history, and that your pathway to the law. Can you tell the group a little bit about what attracted you to law and where you see your scholarship taking you?
Sure, thanks. It's that exact dichotomy, if you will, between 2 worlds. My dad worked about a block away from where I'm sitting now during the daytime as a real estate banker at the Bowery Savings Bank near Grand Central Station in New York. He did that for 8 hours and then returned home at the end of that 8-hour shift, as it turned out, ate, caught a nap, and changed his suit and tie for a pair of overalls so that he could get on the same IRT subway as the motorman and work another 8-hour shift each day, driving the train he rode down to his first job. Somehow he found a way to stick 2 more jobs in there. My mother had 2 jobs, and that's the way I got to be the dean of a really wonderful law school in Washington, D.C. Unfortunately, it exposed both my parents to a great deal of health harm, so that my father died at 48, my mother at 61. And so they, like many African Americans, Latino Americans, Native Americans in the United States, had sicker lives, died quicker, and our family, therefore, has, I think, been shortchanged of the kind of generational wealth, both financially, emotionally, and in other ways, because of the injustice of people who look like them living in places that we grew up in. So why does the law have anything to do with that? Well, if you notice, most of the inequities that led them, my parents, that is, to an earlier death than their white counterparts, than their wealthy counterparts, had to do with the social determinants of health. So we lived in a segregated part of the city. Most of the people who lived there were Black and Puerto Rican. The part of the city where we lived in was proximate to toxicity that is not experienced in this neighborhood where I'm walking around and enjoying my days this time around in New York City. The wage that my father earned was not a living wage, nor was my mother's a living wage. And this is why they worked 2, 3, 4, 5 jobs between them. And all of these are inequities that are mediated by law. So in a nutshell, we distribute the social determinants of law, that we distribute the social determinants of health by law. We distribute them inequitably because of law. And I see law as a vehicle for reversing that inequity and creating an environment in which justice can lead to health.
That's a wonderful answer. Going back in your history, I know that you clerked for the first African-American justice on Virginia's Supreme Court. And for many lawyers, those clerkships are foundational to their careers and what they choose to advance over the course of their legal tenure. Can you talk a little bit about what that experience meant for you and how you see your role in mentoring others?
Sure can. I was a first-generation law student, really not quite a first-generation college student, but almost. By the time I got to the University of Virginia, I was navigating again this wonderful new world that I'm occupying. Legal academy, legal services industry. And I was a kid from the South Bronx finding out that one of the most important things a law student can do after graduation is work for a judge, judicial clerkship. I had a lot of good luck when I was a law student, but I also had some great mentors. People that taught me how to navigate this brand new world, this brave new world I was in. So the recommendation was go work for a judge if you're going to litigate, which is try cases. That's what I did after I graduated. It's good to get a judge's eye view of what litigation looks like. You'll see good lawyers and bad lawyers. You'll see good writing and bad writing. You'll get an idea of what your jurisdiction's law is before you have to be on one side or another of that V of the disputes. This was the recommendation I got. But nobody told me how to pick that clerkship. Well, now I know when I tell students that if you have an offer like I did for a federal clerkship, you should take that. That's the one that's going to be really highly coveted. And I got 1, 2 actually offers to do federal clerkships. But then there was this larger than life African-American man who came and spoke to the students at the University of Virginia. His name was John Charles Thomas. He had a booming voice and a set of experiences that mirrored my own. He grew up poor. He grew up having to work several jobs himself. He was a diligent, hardworking, thoughtful, detail-oriented, careful jurist. And he told me, I'm really proud of you. He told me, I think you're going to go far. And I didn't care about status or prestige or court or jurisdiction. I just wanted to learn from him. And so I made a lifelong friend after making a quick decision to work for the first African-American justice of the Virginia Supreme Court, John Charles Thomas. By the way, he's just written a book called The Poetic Justice. It's his memoir, and it'll bring tears to your eyes and let you know how far we've come in the United States and how far we have to go for racial equality. But back to the story of how I chose him. He inspired me, he believed in me, and he told me he was going to teach me. And so I went to work for him. It really literally did change my trajectory. I believed that instead of doing just the things that would climb the proverbial ladder and go to the highest, most prominent rung, that finding relationships with people who were inspired and inspiring to do the right thing, to change society in the ways that I wanted to change society is a much more important decision to make. And I'll never regret it. He was and continues to be one of my closest friends and mentors.
So how do you pay that forward?
It's one of the reasons I became a dean, to be honest with you. I don't think I'll ever be the justice of the Supreme Court of Virginia, but I looked for a way that I could have access to young minds that are open to being influenced, that are curious about their role in improving society. And that's what teaching law is about. Every classroom I go into is a privilege to talk to people who aren't just getting a degree so that they can better themselves. But if I'm in the right law school, like GW Law, like the University of Colorado, like the University of Virginia, places I've been privileged to teach, they're there because they want to have an impact on the world. They want to solve a big problem. They, like me, saw inequity, or they are concerned that the planet's burning, or they feel as though their voice in helping to advance animal rights or other really important issues are driving them to become capable, competent leaders. So I'm paying it forward by helping to mentor and train and hopefully influence young students and leaders of tomorrow.
Very cool. So thinking a little bit about the topic of the Aspen Ethical Leadership Program's convention this year. So much of your work lies at the intersection of healthcare policy and structural racism, including your last two books, Just Medicine and Just Health. And I'm working my way through Just Health right now, but I'm curious as to how optimistic are you about our healthcare system's willingness and the legal system's willingness to take on structural racism, and how do we do it?
In a nutshell, I'm pretty optimistic. I'm optimistic because I think I've seen a way forward that is novel at the same time that it is historic. Let me explain. I think that the low-hanging fruit of solutions that the healthcare industry can affect by itself to bring more sustainable health equity has been picked. Similarly, I think that the important civil rights gains that we have made over time are not only maxed out in terms of their effectiveness, but in my view, are being attacked and reversed, if not for new and vigilant, aggressive strategies to continue the march towards equality, our vision of equality in this country. In times of great crisis, and I think we're in a great crisis moment where justice and equality are concerned. I think we're in a great crisis moment where health disparities are concerned. We've documented them for 25 years. We've described them. We've spent billions of dollars addressing them and still have only marginally moved the needle. And there are things in which we have seen the needle move the wrong way, maternal mortality gaps, for example. And so since that low-hanging fruit is gone, I'm looking at solutions that people in times of crisis might try when they would otherwise not. So when we see a Supreme Court dismantling the key signature pieces of the Civil Rights era, the Voting Rights Act, the Fair Housing Act, affirmative action, we recognize that if we do believe that educational equality is a precursor to health equality, if we sincerely do believe that segregation in housing, if we sincerely do believe that income inequality must be resolved in order to achieve health equality, we better get moving with some new solutions that we haven't seen before. I'm optimistic that actors in both the legal and the medical, in the social sciences, as well as the hard sciences, are recognizing that it's going to take collaborative leadership in order to achieve the kind of just solutions that will improve health outcomes for all.
Following through, you just mentioned the fact that there have been some decisions that have eroded rights, and we know that there is likely to be decisions that come out this term that may also address issues like affirmative action or the rights of the LGBTQ community. And I saw some of your comments when Justice Ketanji Brown Jackson was appointed to the Supreme Court. And I'm just curious as to your thoughts as to what does it mean to have two women of color on the court for the first time? And how do you see them having an effect in these conversations?
It's earth-shattering. It's history-making to see both Ketanji Brown Jackson and Sonia Sotomayor on the Supreme Court at the same time. It is essential for their voices to be heard. Pat, you might have to remind me, but I think I read yesterday that there was a decision handed down in the June term in which Ketanji Brown Jackson, Justice Jackson, wrote the sole dissent. She was the sole dissenting voice.
That's true.
In a time of crisis, there has to be a drum major for justice. There has to be a voice using their platform to articulate, to powerfully advocate, to hold us to account for the standards that we are departing from and violating. In other words, I think it is crucial for Justice Jackson, Justice Sotomayor, and whomever else will join them in preserving the path forward if the Supreme Court is ever going to return to protecting the rights of minority citizens and minority people in this country. In my view, they're departing from that mandate. That said, it's important to answer your question that there is a Ketanji Brown Jackson, a Sonia Sotomayor, and anybody else who will join them to say, let me document when this country is ready to demand that we return this court to legitimacy and accountability, the path back to our better angels, to our aspirational values, those that were articulated in, for example, the Declaration of Independence that said all were created equal and endowed by their creator with inalienable rights that are being trampled now, or the Constitution, 14th Amendment, Equal Protection Clause, that is also emblazoned over the Supreme Court that is trampling those rights right now, equal justice under law. So if we are to have someone to speak out and remind us of our aspirational goals, it's got to be the kinds of dissenting voices that Justices Sotomayor and Jackson bring us.
Thank you for sharing that. Just for the listeners on the call, the case that Dean Matthew was referring to was an 8-1 decision in which the Justice Jackson had disagreed with her colleagues on a labor dispute that made it easier for companies to sue whenever there were worker strikes. And so she was a voice on behalf of the workers in a ruling that favored the industry. And if I'm encapsulating what you're saying correctly, Dayna, and tell me if I'm not, please, but that the voice of dissent is important even on the court, that if you're in a place where you may not have the majority in the legal ruling, but that ability to speak and be heard has purpose and sets a pathway for future decisions.
You're encapsulating it exactly correctly. Let's think about the fact that Plessy versus Ferguson, the majority said that I wasn't a person, that I had no citizenship rights. And it was Justice Harlan, who's called the great dissenter, in dissent, who explained the travesty of that point of view. And it took hundreds of years before the court followed that dissent. It was Justice Ruth Bader Ginsburg who dissented over and over again in gender discrimination cases. It takes time. It takes sometimes longer than it should. And that's why the court can't be the only actor for justice. I think we're in a period of history where leadership in achieving justice and achieving equality, especially racial equality, ethnic equality, socioeconomic equality, it's going to have to depend on leadership from other quarters. We can't depend on this court right now, Supreme Court. I don't think we can even depend wholly on the judiciary, but there's got to be other tools in our belt, if you will, for those of us that are seeking to achieve justice in order to achieve better health outcomes.
And as we think about the conversations that you'll be participating in and leading this fall in Aspen, so much of healthcare is policy and it's statutory. And what do you see the pathway to make our system more just when you're dealing with this as a public policy issue, not as a matter necessarily of constitutional right? Because the Supreme Court has said that there is not a true right to health in the way that might be recognized in some of the international documents under our Constitution. So how do people best have effect in the public policy sphere?
Again, the thing that makes me most optimistic is that the answer to that question is that there are almost an unlimited number of ways in which we can affect justice in public policy. In fact, in many ways, although the court historically, the Supreme Court that is, has been a leader in setting the overarching tone, justice is really accomplished through policy on the ground at the level of institutions, providers, clinicians. Justice is accomplished when legislators do justice. Justice is accomplished when city council members and school boards do justice. And by doing justice, I mean simply, really, I'm going to borrow something from Tim Keller, who's a theologian who just died recently. And his view of what justice was simply making certain to ensure that even the most vulnerable members of our society have an equal opportunity to experience the same resources as everyone else. So how you do that from a policy perspective is almost easier than how you do it from a constitutional perspective. You're exactly right, there's no constitutional right to health. But we can set policies about what insurers will pay for, where access will be given to provide health care, to require compassionate, culturally competent, trained providers to deliver care that is accountable because we're collecting and analyzing and responding to data. Deliver care that is collaborative with providers who are ensuring equal access and equal opportunity to experience fair housing, clean air, clean water, food security, and freedom from pollution. All of these things are policy decisions, and there's a virtually unlimited number of ways that actors in each of these sectors of our society and economy can do justice and make sure that equal opportunity is distributed to the most vulnerable people in society.
So we had a question pop into the chat. And when I was speaking earlier, I mentioned the term affirmative action, but really it's dealing with race-conscious admissions that the Supreme Court's going to be ruling on maybe any day now. But there was a question in the chat about, can you clarify what affirmative action means? And then I think asking you, what do you feel about affirmative action?
Sure. Affirmative action is a term that originated during the Kennedy administration, not even in the educational context. It was looking at the vast differences in opportunity, educational opportunity, employment opportunity, housing opportunity by race. So looking at the data, another policy way that we can encourage justice, by the way, paying attention to data collection and analysis on a stratified basis. But we were looking back in the 60s at these vast disparities and deciding that it would take the action of those who were intentionally going to reverse historical discrimination in order to equalize educational, housing, employment, and other opportunity. That intentionality was termed affirmative. You have to act affirmatively in order to reverse the historic exclusion of Black, Latino, Native Americans from quality education in public schools. You have to act affirmatively in order to reverse historic discrimination that required people from Chinese descent to live in one part of the city in San Francisco, and people of Mexican descent to be off the streets by a certain hour. These historically affirmative acts of discrimination would take affirmative action on the part of governments who were serious about reversing them, and hence the term affirmative action was born. It's most frequently applied to what you just described, Pat, race-conscious admission to higher education. An affirmative act of reversing historical exclusion and a historical inferiority of educational systems that make it unlikely that minority children will have an equal opportunity to get higher education opportunities, such as those that led to my success at being on the faculty at the University of Colorado, the University of Virginia, or the Dean of GW. So what do I think about affirmative action? Well, the fact of the matter is I wouldn't be where I am right now if there were not people committed to affirmative action. There are many, many, many people in the neighborhood where I grew up 7 miles from here who are as smart as I am, as capable as I am, as visionary as I am, as anxious as I am to have good lives for themselves and their children and their family. But they are excluded from the opportunities I've had because they haven't had the good fortune of someone affirmatively acting, as someone did in my instance, to pick me up out of the South Bronx public school system and put me in a school system that would lead to Harvard, UVA, University of Colorado degrees, and ultimately the job I hold. I'm very grateful for affirmative action.
And when we think about the job that you currently hold, Malia at the top told us a little bit about the Equity Institute and the interdisciplinarity of it. And I'm curious about the Institute and that interdisciplinarity focus. It feels like we're not going to be able to solve all of our problems if we are working within our silos. So can you share a little bit of the vision of the Institute and how you envision that coming together?
Sure. It's a full circle experience to talk to you about this, Pat, because the Equity Institute at the George Washington University was just chartered in April as a research institute that will use the tools of higher education, that is to create new knowledge, to train civil servants, and to serve communities in order to make a contribution to the eradication of racial, ethnic, and socioeconomic inequality. So we'll use the tools that we have to discharge what I think is the highest purpose of higher education, and that is to nurture hope, to build cultural understanding, and to help solve some of society's most pressing issues. That's the Institute in a nutshell. But the reason it comes full circle is because when I was at the University of Colorado, we started something called the Colorado Health Equity Project, and you were a part of that, Pat. We were looking at ways to foment new medical legal partnerships, and we started 3. My understanding is that 2 of those are still going right now, ways in which we took lawyers into medical clinics to solve legal problems that were barriers to good health. Paradigmatic case, of course, was a kid with asthma. A kid couldn't use just the albuterol inhaler or the nebulizer, solve their asthma problem if they went home to a housing development that was mold or pest infested and fought and competed with the medical treatment. And so we needed to join forces, medical and legal forces, hence the term medical legal partnership. So the Colorado Health Equity Project was really my first equity institute, if you will. And that was at the University of Colorado. Thankfully, that's still going. Fast forward to the time when I was at the University of Virginia on faculty there with a group of visionary women, mostly women. There were a couple of men involved, but that was a group of visionary women who were from schools of music, architecture, public policy, law, medicine, public health, all got together and decided that our research had to be interdisciplinary to create new knowledge, new solutions, and teach our students how to become solutionary leaders if we were going to make a real dent in racial and ethnic inequality. We built an equity center at the University of Virginia, which is going like gangbusters, doing lots of educational equity. So my track record started at the University of Colorado, and I've just now had the great pleasure of building an institute at the George Washington University, where there are 10 colleges and schools. Of those 10 colleges and schools, 9 have participated in developing research projects, cross-disciplinary research projects, in which one school will partner with another school in order to create a project with community partners that will reduce in some way racial, ethnic, or socioeconomic inequality in a community.
I'm excited that you've taken the work that started here in Colorado, and it sounds like you are moving it into a new phase of evolution, which is awfully exciting. Now, I'm going to switch gears for a moment, and you talked a little bit about your growing up in New York, your mom and your dad, but I also know that you're a mom of 3 children. And how does your role as a mom shape the work that you do as a leader?
All right, I'm going to give you the recordable answer. My children are all adults now. I manage a law school of, about almost 2,000 students, a little under 200 staff and administrators. And I often say that the best preparation I had for dealing with the problems I deal with as a leader in administration is that I survived adolescence and teen years. So I can solve squabbles and fights and wait out bad behavior and help to become a bridge builder in running an organization because I was a parent. I understand passionate disagreements. I understand mission-driven colleagues. I understand what it is to help keep an organization on mission. And I think a lot of that came from being a parent, to be honest.
Yeah, I learn a lot from my kids. But it's interesting that you mention your role and that you've got students and faculty and staff. And there was a comment that came through in the chat about the field of education and a teacher observing that there's a lot of dysfunction in education in the field and manifesting in discrimination and bullying and violence. And so how do you think about that in terms of educational culture and what you're trying to shape at GW we can talk about a just and equitable society, but we also have the institutions in which we work.
I'm so excited about this question because if I were to have another lifetime, professional lifetime, I think it would not be enough to really begin to crystallize the way in which improving the environment and quality of education, K through 12 and higher education, must be done in order to produce an equitable society. I think it's one of the most underappreciated and underutilized weapons against injustice that we could name. That is, creating justice and equality in the educational system, creating an environment which encourages and inculcates, if you will, the values of equality and justice, the values of compassion and impact, empathy, is one of the most important pathways towards health equity that we don't quite yet understand, and our interventions have, in my opinion, underutilized. So we've got lots of good theory, Carol Hogue, so many other people, such good theory that links educational attainment to good health outcomes. We know this from educational literacy. We know this from social networks and organizations. We know this from so many different conceptual or theoretical framework. But we haven't yet done what I think this question implicates, and that is understood how on the ground, improving the environment and quality of education in the classroom every day, K through 12, as well as higher education, will actually have to become more just if we intend to reverse the health inequity that we're talking about. I mean, we can go back to my parents, right? My parents died early because if I were to be a success in life professionally, I could not be educated in the South Bronx, right? I couldn't be educated in the schools that at the elementary school level, I had to travel over 4 highways in order to get to my kindergarten, first grade, and third grade class. When I got there, the books we used were hand-me-down books. If I had gone to the middle school and high school that were feeders for my neighborhood, I would have had to go through metal detectors in order to get into the school. There were more police officers than there were college advisors in my school. All of this inequality, all of this social dysfunction dooms kids from being active participants in our society in a way that would allow them to experience justice, to have an equal opportunity to society's resources. That's a problem that I think we who believe in health equity are going to have to much more carefully analyze and develop interventions on the ground if we're really serious about health equity.
Thanks, Dana, and thank you for the comment. We've got another question that popped up in the chat on how can transdisciplinary public health law and bioethics assess and address health disparity and promote family and community resilience?
A lot of very important questions in one.
Yeah, that's a big one.
Yeah. So let me start with the interdisciplinary relationship between public health law and bioethics. As you know, Pat, I got my start thinking deeply about bioethics at the Center for Bioethics and Humanities at the Anschutz Medical Campus. There are a group of very careful, thoughtful ethicists there who really changed my thinking from a single, I think I'm almost going to have to credit them with changing my thinking from sort of one tool solution to really understanding that this thing I was calling justice was not just a legal concept. And if I were to treat it as a legal concept, it would be anemic and ineffective, right? To understand justice as an ethical principle and to understand justice as an underlying value that would have to infest, if you will, really infiltrate any exercise of law, not just as an objective or an outcome. I want to do justice or achieve justice, a noun, but I had to understand the values and the principles that bioethicists understand when they describe what justice is, how it differs from fairness. Now, I prefer all the sort of formulations of justice that I learned and studied about with my colleagues at the Center for Bioethics and Humanities. I prefer the Rawlsian notion of justice, that notion of fairness, fairness of opportunity. How that translates into and maps onto the creation of laws, regulations, ordinances, and statutes that actually do justice is an exercise that only takes place when you marry the ethical value with the tool set of the outcome of justice that one's trying to achieve. So that interdisciplinarity is essential to make hard choices. Legislating is hard, regulating is hard. There aren't easy choices when you're trying to pass a piece of legislation that will improve equity in classrooms or improve access to healthcare. The regulatory decisions require competing trade-offs, very hard decisions, and understanding where principles and values, ethical values, direct is key. Now, the last part of the question had to do with families. And if you wrote it down, you can help me because I want to segue to that part of the question, but I'm not remembering exactly how the questioner put it.
The question was really saying, how can we use these tools to both address health disparities and to promote family and community resilience?
Promoting family and community resilience. I am going to confess that promoting family and community resilience is a topic that will require more thinking on my part.
When I'm thinking about it, this question, there's some lovely distinctions that exist within it. And one of the things that really strikes me, Dayna, that you and I have talked about before, is that law itself is actually a lagging indicator. Our laws always come after there is some societal impetus for it. And so when we think about bioethics and we think about the opportunities that we have as communities to address the social determinants of health, it feels like we need to use those as tools to create the incentive for the legal system to react to. Because if there's not the ethical imperative, then it does, and what the legal imperative won't take effect.
Yeah. There is certainly a chicken and egg kind of conundrum, if you will. Law tends to be the consensus agreement that a society or community can reach at the floor or the bottom of any ethical or moral decision. So I agree with you. The law lags. Society has to reach a ethical determination that it values racial equality enough to pass a reversal of separate but equal historic precedent. But separate but equal prevailed from 1877 all the way to 1964. Why? Because that was the societal value, the ethical principle that was acceptable, and the law simply reflected it, articulated it. It's one of the reasons that, returning to this question about resilience in communities and resilience in families, I don't think that leadership in law or medicine alone is even enough. I don't think that leadership in law, medicine, or academic disciplines is ever enough to achieve equity in the health realm, certainly, but generally, even more importantly. And why that is I honestly think protest is essential. Community activism is essential. I honestly think that the tools that are at the disposal of those who are not professional are essential. I think religious and spiritual leaders have to be engaged in the conversation of making a cultural shift, a societal shift. That's why I think even those who are sitting at a dinner table and listening to polemic conversations, journalists are essential. People are essential in each of their respective sectors to make a more resilient community, to make a more resilient family structure. It's not going to be possible for the lagging law, even if it accurately picks up ethical principles, to do it alone.
And I have a interesting question that might be a great one for us to end with, and then pick up the conversation again this fall for anyone who can join us in Aspen. But it is, can you talk more about the moral determinants of health? Not so much in the moral principles, but more in the moral engagement and passion that leaders like MLK, John Lewis, and many others were fueled by, and how we can encourage that energy and passion in our students.
I love this question. It's one I think that takes lots more conversation, but again, it's what I love about being a law teacher of any sort. Being driven by grand vision of what society can be, aspiring to a truly beloved community, aspiring to make actual the best intentions of our founding fathers and mothers, the best intentions, leaders who have come to New York or Washington, D.C. to make policy and lead our country, who've taken up a role leading a health system, a hospital, a clinic. That's the real joy of what we do and why personally I get up every morning. It's the moral conviction that I am actually able to join forces with others to bring our society to what it hopes and aspires to be. The only way we do that is to keep talking about it, to keep requiring it to be at the core and the center of everything we do. To compel not only our bedtime prayers or Saturday morning Sabbaths to be the place where we talk about equality and justice and fairness and even resilience, but also to require that the way we do our jobs day to day, the way we teach our students, the way we make HR decisions or choose who we do business with, how we do business. All of that has to be inspired and it has to be front and centered by the moral convictions that everything you do, everything I do, will either contribute to or detract from higher values that I hope to serve in my career, I hope to serve and see actualized in my society. It's got to be every day in every way.
That is a good place. There's some comments in the chat that are thanking you, Dayna, for the work that you do to support both the physical and mental side of people, and the advocacy that you do, as well as for those who are interested. Lachlan has prepared a one-page summary of Just Medicine that if anyone would like to review. Obviously, Dayna's books are wonderful, but it could help to inform some of our conversations when we get together this fall. And I think we've just about used up our time. But Dayna, any parting thoughts for our group?
This is an exciting conversation. I just started looking at the list of people. I didn't know my dear friend Lachlan Farrow is on, and Matt is on, and I just look forward to this conversation in September. It's going to be one that will stimulate and grow me, and I hope others as well. So I look forward to seeing you there.
Thanks. Malia, anything else we need to do to wrap up our conversation today, other than to thank Dayna for her time and willingness to share, and thank everyone who joined us for listening?
Yeah, I think that about covers it. I put my email in the chat if anyone has any questions. I realized I didn't say who I was at the beginning. I'm the outreach program manager at the Center for Bioethics, which is one of the planners of the Aspen program, along with Colorado Health Institute and the Aspen Center for Social Values. So we all look forward to seeing you, and we hope to have a few more of these Meet the Keynote conversations. So if you signed up, we'll email you the video and any further conversations that we intend to have. So thank you so much.